In corporate America, betrayal comes wrapped in buzzwords like restructuring. You think stolen credit is the worst part? No. It is being exiled to the front desk to watch the thief take your glory. But true power never sits in a glass office. It belongs to whoever controls the data flow. Grab a dark coffee. Let me tell you how I turned a cheap receptionist chair into a throne and legally destroyed the man who put me there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. But I must sincerely share that YouTube has completely disabled our channel monetization, leaving us with zero budget to operate, which means we will sadly not be uploading new videos here in the near future and are moving our operations to Patreon. If you find today's story satisfying, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, significantly longer, and filled with detailed situations we cannot publish on YouTube, all performed by a cast of emotional voice actors. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or comments below. Now, grab that cup of dark coffee, because today we are diving into the life of Quinn Hudson. I am 34 years old, and up until a frigid Tuesday morning, I was the lead cold chain supply systems engineer at Aegis MedRoute Solutions. We are a Boston-based logistics firm that specializes in moving highly sensitive biopharmaceuticals across the country. If a batch of experimental leukemia drugs gets 1 degree too warm during transit, millions of dollars and potentially hundreds of lives go down the drain. My job was to make sure that never happened. Or rather, it was my job. Until I was summoned to the glass-walled office of Julian Vance. Julian was our chief operating officer. He was the absolute embodiment of modern corporate America, a man whose entire existence consisted of tailored Italian suits, an Ivy League master of business administration, and absolutely zero technical knowledge. He did not know the difference between a server rack and a toaster oven, but he sure knew how to use words like synergy and paradigm shift to sound important. His office smelled like expensive cologne, unearned confidence, and impending doom. I sat down across from his sprawling mahogany desk. Julian steepled his manicured fingers together, adopting that faux empathetic posture they teach sociopaths in executive leadership seminars. Quinn, Aegis is currently undergoing a strategic resource optimization phase, Julian said, his voice dripping with synthetic warmth. After careful review, we have realized that we need to drastically elevate our client-facing experience. The board feels, and I strongly agree, that the company needs someone with deep, hands-on technical expertise at the front desk to greet our VIP partners. Effective immediately, you are being transitioned to the role of lead corporate receptionist. My brain froze for exactly 2 seconds as it translated his corporate garbage into reality. Lead corporate receptionist was just a shiny title for front desk duty. Moving to the front desk meant my employee classification would be changed from engineering to administrative support. And administrative support meant my network privileges to the main development servers would be instantly and permanently revoked. The realization hit my chest like a sledgehammer. The quarterly board meeting was exactly 3 weeks away. For the past 8 months, I had sacrificed my evenings, my weekends, and my sanity to build a revolutionary project I called the Real-Time Drug Temperature Tracking Network. It was an advanced system utilizing artificial intelligence to predict temperature fluctuations in our transport vehicles before they even happened. It was brilliant, it was flawless, and it was entirely my creation. And Julian Vance was stealing it. By locking me out of the servers, he was cutting me off from my own code repository. He was going to stand up in that boardroom, project my data onto the massive screen, and claim my genius as his own personal vision for the future of Aegis. He was going to use my sweat and blood to secure his promotion to Chief Executive Officer, while tossing me away like a used napkin. I looked at his face. I saw the faint, predatory gleam in his eyes. He was waiting for me to snap. He wanted me to scream, to throw a tantrum, to give him a documented reason to fire me for insubordination so he would not even have to pay me severance. But I am an engineer. I do not throw tantrums. I analyze systems. I find the flaws, and I exploit them. So, I swallowed a rage so intense it tasted like battery acid. I kept my face entirely blank, forced my shoulders to slump in perfect defeat, and let out a quiet sigh. I understand, Julian, I murmured, playing the broken employee to perfection. His smile widened into a sickening grin of absolute victory. He genuinely believed that separating me from the lab had silenced me forever. An hour later, I was forced to pack my technical manuals, my ergonomic keyboard, and my pride into a single cardboard box. I took the long elevator ride down to the ground floor. My new kingdom was a rickety, imitation wood desk situated squarely in the middle of the main lobby. It was positioned directly across from the automatic revolving glass doors, meaning that every single time a delivery person walked into the building, a brutal blast of freezing Boston winter air slapped me right in the face. Human Resources even sent down a cheap, crooked plastic name tag that simply read, Quinn. Reception. I sat down in the squeaky, unpadded chair. I meticulously arranged my cheap ballpoint pens. I watched the suited executives walk past me, their eyes sliding right over my desk as if I were nothing more than a potted plant or a piece of lobby furniture. To them, I was invisible. To Julian, I was neutralized. He thought he had driven the final nail into my coffin. He was absolutely certain that putting me at the front desk was the ultimate humiliation, a permanent gag order wrapped in a demotion. What Julian Vance failed to realize, however, was that in any corporate ecosystem, the person at the front desk sees every single crack in the foundation. He thought he had banished me to a plywood prison. He had no idea he had just given me the perfect vantage point to watch his entire empire burn to the ground. For 14 days, I ceased to be a human being. I became an architectural feature of the Aegis MedRote Solutions lobby. To the executives rushing past, I was no different than the potted ficus in the corner or the polished marble floors they walked on. People do not guard their secrets around a woman whose primary function is signing for courier packages and meticulously arranging industry magazines on a low glass table. In their eyes, my intelligence had been wiped clean the moment I pinned on that cheap plastic name tag. That was their first fatal mistake. When you sit perfectly still at the center of a corporate ecosystem, you begin to see the cracks forming in the foundation. The front desk was not just a desk. It was the primary intake valve for the entire company. By the middle of the second week, the intake valve was choking. It started with the delivery drivers. They would stomp through the revolving doors, their heavy boots tracking gray slush across the lobby, slapping their ruggedized tablets onto my counter with heavy sighs. "Your system is completely locked up again," a driver named Marcus growled one Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight with frustration. "I have a payload of rare immunotherapy treatments sitting in the loading bay, and the barcode scanner has been frozen for 45 minutes. If I do not get a temperature verification soon, this entire load is compromised." It was not just Marcus. The complaints became a steady, rhythmic drumbeat. Millions of dollars in experimental pharmaceuticals were being flagged for return. The transport manifests were showing wild, erratic temperature spikes that I knew for a fact were physically impossible. The system was generating false reports, panicking the clients, and triggering automatic FDA compliance recalls. The cause of this chaos walked right past me every afternoon. Julian Vance had developed a nervous habit of pacing the expansive ground floor lobby while taking high-stakes phone calls, assuming the ambient noise of the revolving doors would mask his conversations. He also assumed the receptionist sorting the mail had no idea what a cascading database failure sounded like. "I do not care what the interface looks like," Julian hissed into his smartphone one afternoon, his polished veneer cracking under the pressure. "The dashboard is pretty, but the tracking numbers are completely erratic. Just make it work." "What do you mean the predictive model is missing? Find it." I kept my head down, slowly sorting manila envelopes, hiding a cold smile. Julian had stolen the shiny front end of my project to dazzle the board of directors. He had taken the beautiful user interface and the basic tracking modules, But he lacked the technical depth to realize that the soul of the project, the artificial intelligence core designed to predict and compensate for temperature fluctuations, was not in that directory. I had not integrated it yet. Without my core algorithm, his stolen software was just an empty, confused shell, blindly guessing at data and failing spectacularly. I could have told him how to fix it. I could have marched upstairs, offered the missing code, and begged for my old job back. But I was done saving Aegis. The final piece of my puzzle arrived on my 20th day in exile, quite literally beneath my feet. The draft from the main doors was particularly brutal that morning. Shivering, I ducked under the heavy plywood desk to plug in a small ceramic space heater I had smuggled into the building. As I reached toward the wall outlet, hidden behind a tangled mess of old telephone wires, my fingers brushed against something metallic and out of place. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crawled deeper into the shadows under the desk. There, covered in a thick layer of dust and forgotten by the information technology department for at least a decade, was a secondary local area network port. My heart executed a slow, heavy thump against my ribs. I traced the thick blue cable running from the port, up through the drywall, directly toward the central maintenance shaft. This was not a standard employee network connection. This was a hardwired, physical backdoor left over from the original building construction, plugged directly into the environmental and temperature control mainframe of the entire facility. It was an unmonitored, unrestricted pipeline into the nervous system of the company. I sat back in my squeaky chair, staring at the polished lobby floor as the pieces of a master plan clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Julian's stolen software was actively collapsing. When it fully failed, Aegis would be desperate. They would realize that fixing the old software was impossible, and that the modern pharmaceutical logistics market demanded a completely new, combined hardware and software solution to guarantee safety. It would require something entirely outside the control of Aegis. I reached down, my fingers lightly brushing the hidden network port. I was not going to fix their system. I was going to use this forgotten port to secretly build a new one, entirely on my own terms. My days fractured into a bizarre, high-stakes dual existence, playing out right in the middle of the crowded lobby. On the surface, I was the impeccably polite barrier between the outside world and the executive suites. I signed for Julian's daily $45 sushi lunches with a pleasant, vacant smile. I fielded endless, frantic phone calls from regional logistics managers who were practically screaming into their receivers about ruined shipments and failing scanners. But beneath the faux wood laminate of my desk, shielded by a carefully positioned trash can, a very different operation was underway. I had smuggled my personal laptop into the building, a sleek, heavily modified machine that I kept hidden inside my oversized leather tote bag, while my right hand stamped incoming mail and sorted glossy industry brochures. My left hand reached down into the shadows and plugged a discreet Ethernet cable directly into that forgotten local area network port. Within seconds, my screen flooded with lines of command prompts as I established a secure, heavily encrypted virtual private network tunnel, because the port was a digital ghost, left completely off the modern network topology maps by an information technology department that valued convenience over actual security. My connection was entirely invisible to the corporate firewall. I was sitting in the middle of their fortress, tunneling straight into their structural framework, and not a single alarm tripped. The adrenaline of operating in plain sight was intoxicating. One afternoon, Julian actually leaned against the front of my desk, tapping his expensive leather shoes, complaining loudly to a vice president about the incompetent software developers downstairs. He was less than 3 feet away from my screen, where I was actively compiling the data architecture that would soon destroy his career. I just nodded sympathetically, offered him a complimentary mint, and waited for him to walk away before hitting the execute key. When the clock struck 5, the real work began. I did not go out for drinks with the administrative staff. I took the subway back to my cramped, dimly lit apartment and transformed my small dining table into a high-tech laboratory. For the next 3 weeks, sleep became a purely abstract concept. I lived on cold brew coffee, protein bars, and sheer, unadulterated willpower. I was not just going to write a new software patch to fix the mess Julian made. I was going to render the entire Aegis infrastructure permanently obsolete. The solution was not fixing their central server. The solution was destroying the need for a central server altogether. I began designing a proprietary mesh sensor system. Instead of relying on a fragile, constant connection to a main database that Julian was currently driving into the ground. My design utilized a microchip no larger than a standard postage stamp. These chips would be affixed directly to every single crate of experimental pharmaceuticals. Here is the brilliant part. The concept that would make my old system look like a child's toy. I programmed these microchips to communicate directly with each other. If you want to understand the architecture, do not think of a traditional network where every computer blindly reports to a giant command tower. Think of an army of microscopic ants operating in the pitch dark. If one ant encounters a sudden drop in ambient temperature, it does not wait for instructions from the tower. It instantly passes that critical, time-stamped information to the ant next to it, which passes it to the next, creating an unbreakable, decentralized chain of verified data. The crates would talk to each other, validate their own internal temperatures, and store the encrypted data locally within the mesh network. They did not need the Aegis mainframe to tell them they were safe. They were completely autonomous, self-verifying, and utterly unhackable by Julian's team. But possessing a revolutionary technology was only half the battle. I needed a weaponized corporate entity to wield it. I could not just walk up to buyers as Quinn the receptionist. During my mandated 30-minute lunch breaks, hunched over my burner phone in the freezing concrete stairwell of the parking garage, I orchestrated my corporate facade. I contacted a highly specialized corporate attorney I found through an encrypted forum. For exactly $2,500, I hired his firm to establish a completely opaque shell company. We incorporated the business in Wyoming, a state renowned for its absolute corporate secrecy laws and fierce protection of privacy. I named the entity Apex Dynamic Systems, through the meticulous use of registered agents and a blind trust mechanism. My actual name appeared absolutely nowhere on the public registry or the state tax documents. To the outside world, to any corporate spy or curious executive, Apex Dynamic Systems was a shadowy, heavily funded tech startup boasting proprietary logistics solutions. To me, it was a loaded gun pointed directly at the 15th floor of the Aegis building. The final step required a terrifying leap of faith, a moment where I had to push all my chips into the center of the table, filing a provisional patent with expedited processing for both the physical hardware design of the microchip and the complex artificial intelligence algorithm running the mesh network was incredibly expensive. The legal fees and the filing costs were astronomical for a single, demoted employee. Late one Thursday night, with the glow of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes, I logged into my banking portal and stared at my life savings. Every annual bonus I had ever earned, every vacation I had skipped for the last 7 years, sitting there in a neat row of digital numbers, with a perfectly steady hand. I authorized the wire transfer to the patent attorneys. I watched my account balance drain down to exactly $32.14. It was a staggering financial risk, but it was the necessary price of a flawless execution. I made absolutely sure the patent application included one highly specific, deeply technical detail. Through my old engineering industry contacts, I knew that the federal regulators were secretly drafting new, aggressively stringent guidelines for the transportation of biological materials. Within the next 12 to 18 months, the Food and Drug Administration would mandate a very specific, ultra-secure cryptographic hash protocol to prevent the exact kind of data tampering and negligence Julian was currently trying to cover up to save his skin. I wove that exact, incredibly complex encryption standard directly into the foundational code of my mesh sensors. I locked it down so tight that modifying it would require rewriting the entire operating system from scratch. I was not just patenting a clever tracking device, I was patenting the only legally viable future for the entire biopharmaceutical transport industry. When the government regulations inevitably changed, Aegis would not just want my technology to fix their broken system, they would be legally required to have it just to stay in business. I closed my laptop as the cold morning sun began to rise over the Boston city skyline, casting long shadows across my living room. The trap was meticulously set. The steel jaws were pulled all the way back, and all I had to do now was wait for the prey to confidently step right onto the trigger. Every parasite needs a host, and for Aegis MedRoot Solutions, that host was a pharmaceutical titan named Vanguard Therapeutics. They accounted for 68% of our total quarterly revenue. If Vanguard pulled their contracts, Aegis would not just suffer a bad fiscal year, the company would face immediate, catastrophic bankruptcy. Julian Vance was currently gambling the entire survival of the firm on his ability to keep Vanguard completely blind to the fact that his stolen, broken system was actively ruining their highly sensitive cargo. He was playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded cylinder. It was time for me to pull the trigger for him. At exactly 12:15 on a Tuesday, I took my state-mandated 30-minute lunch break. I did not go to the cafeteria. I walked down into the subterranean concrete levels of the employee parking garage, the only place where the security cameras had a known blind spot near the industrial dumpsters. I leaned against the freezing concrete wall, pulled a prepaid burner phone from my coat pocket, and dialed a direct, unlisted number I had memorized from the Aegis 5 IP client registry. I was not calling a customer service representative. I was calling Dr. Elias Thorne, the notoriously ruthless global director of supply chain for Vanguard Therapeutics. The line clicked open. "Thorne!" a sharp, impatient voice barked. "Dr. Thorne, my name is Quinn, representing Apex Dynamic Systems," I said, pitching my voice an octave lower, stripping away the polite receptionist warmth and replacing it with the clipped, icy authority of a high-level tech consultant. "I am calling because you are currently bleeding capital. Specifically, you lost a shipment of experimental synthetic insulin last Thursday at 4 in the morning, and your current logistics provider is lying to you about why it happened." Silence hung on the line. It was a heavy, dangerous silence. When he finally spoke, his tone was lethal. "Who is this? And how do you have that information? That incident is under a strict non-disclosure agreement." "I have it because your logistics provider's current data architecture is fundamentally flawed," I continued, ignoring his threat. "They are blaming ambient weather conditions and driver error. They are lying. Their central server dropped the predictive algorithm during a routine database migration. The cooling units in the transport truck shut down for exactly 47 minutes because they stopped receiving active ping requests. They cooked your insulin, Dr. Thorne, and they are frantically patching the logs right now to cover their tracks." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. I had him. I had just handed him the exact internal failure codes Julian was desperately trying to bury. "Apex Dynamic Systems has a solution," I stated, pressing the advantage. "A decentralized hardware and software mesh network that bypasses central server dependency entirely. I can guarantee zero data loss and 100% compliance with the upcoming federal regulations. But I need 20 minutes of your time, face-to-face, digitally." 2:00, Thorne snapped. "Send the secure link." At 1:55, I told the lobby security guard I needed to use the restroom. Instead, I slipped down the narrow side corridor and unlocked the heavy wooden door of the ground-floor janitorial supply closet. The space was no larger than a standard elevator car, reeking of industrial bleach and damp mop heads. It was the absolute antithesis of a corporate boardroom. I balanced my laptop on a stack of unopened toilet paper cartons. I quickly unbuttoned my cheap corporate cardigan and slipped on a perfectly tailored, charcoal gray designer blazer I had hidden in my tote bag. I adjusted my posture so the webcam captured only my shoulders and the blank, beige wall behind me. From the waist up, I was the sharp, commanding face of a cutting-edge technology firm. From the waist down, I was still wearing the hideous, lint-covered polyester slacks of the Aegis front desk uniform. At exactly 2:00, I joined the encrypted video conference. Dr. Thorne appeared on the screen, flanked by two severe-looking legal advisors. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. For the next 15 minutes, I delivered the most aggressive, technically flawless pitch of my entire career. I dissected his current vulnerabilities with surgical precision. I displayed the encrypted schematics of the Apex mesh sensor. I did not just explain how the microchips communicated autonomously. I showed him the exact mathematical models proving that our technology would completely eliminate the millions of dollars in product spoilage he was currently suffering. Thorne leaned forward, his initial skepticism melting into intense, predatory interest. This is remarkable technology, but implementing a completely unproven system across our entire supply chain is a massive logistical risk. Why should Vanguard gamble on Apex? This was the moment, the psychological checkmate. Because, Dr. Thorne, it is not a gamble. It is an insurance policy against the federal government, I said, my voice dangerously calm. In exactly 8 months, the Food and Drug Administration is rolling out new mandates requiring cryptographic verification for all biological transport. The system your current provider uses will fail those compliance checks completely. When that happens, Vanguard will be hit with catastrophic fines, and your distribution lines will be frozen by federal injunction. I paused, letting the fear of government intervention settle deeply into the room. Apex Dynamic Systems is already built on the exact encryption architecture the federal government is about to mandate. We hold the exclusive provisional patent. I am not just offering you a better thermometer. I am offering you the only legal way to keep shipping your drugs next year. Thorne's eyes widened slightly. He saw the trap closing, not on him, but on his vendors. What are your terms? Apex Dynamic Systems will grant Vanguard Therapeutics an exclusive master license to our mesh technology at a highly discounted enterprise rate, I said, leaning closer to the webcam. But there is one non-negotiable condition. You must immediately amend your service-level agreements with all of your logistics partners. You will mandate that they must adopt and purchase the Apex Dynamic hardware and software suite within exactly 14 days. If they fail to integrate our technology, you terminate their contracts immediately for non-compliance. Thorne stared at me through the screen. He was a ruthless businessman, and he instantly recognized the beauty of the play. I was giving Vanguard total security, and I was forcing Aegis to pay the bill. If Aegis wanted to keep Vanguard's business, they would have to buy the technology from me, at whatever price I demanded. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Thorne's face. Draft the agreement. You will have our signatures by close of business today. I ended the call, closed the laptop, and let out a long, shaky breath that echoed in the tiny closet. I took off the designer blazer, folded it carefully into my bag, and smoothed out my polyester uniform pants. When I walked back out into the lobby to take my seat at the rickety wooden desk, Julian Vance was standing by the revolving doors, completely unaware that his execution warrant had just been signed in a room filled with floor wax and dirty mops. The Vanguard ultimatum detonated on the 15th floor at exactly 8:15 on Monday morning. I knew the exact second it hit the executive inboxes because the ambient noise of the building actually changed. First, there was a deafening silence. Then, a cacophony of ringing desk phones bled through the ceiling tiles, followed immediately by the frantic sound of leather dress shoes sprinting down the glass hallways above me. It was the beautiful, chaotic symphony of corporate panic, and I had a front row seat. By 9 o'clock, Julian Vance was in full meltdown mode. Through the corporate grapevine, a panicked assistant running downstairs to grab antacids told me everything. Vanguard Therapeutics had sent a legally binding notice stating that Aegis had exactly 14 days to integrate the Apex Dynamic Systems hardware and software suite, or their logistics contract would be instantly terminated. Julian scrambled to call an emergency all-hands meeting. He had spent the last month promising the board of directors that his revolutionary new tracking interface, the one he stole from me, was going to secure Vanguard for the next decade. Now, Vanguard was not just rejecting his system. They were legally forcing him to buy technology from a completely unknown third party just to keep his job. Naturally, Julian's first instinct was not to buy the technology, but to steal it. He locked himself in a conference room with the head of information technology and the chief legal counsel. According to the terrified assistant, Julian demanded that they find this apex dynamic entity, buy one of their microchips, and immediately reverse engineer the mesh network so Aegis could just build it themselves. That was when he hit the concrete wall I had built with my life savings. When the Aegis legal team pulled up the public filings for the Apex provisional patent, they nearly had a collective heart attack. My lawyer had drafted the protections so aggressively, weaving the upcoming federal compliance codes directly into the proprietary architecture, that the technology was functionally untouchable. The chief legal counsel reportedly looked Julian dead in the eye and explained that any attempt to copy the cryptographic hash protocol would not just result in a lawsuit from Apex, it would trigger an immediate audit from the Food and Drug Administration, leading to fines upwards of $50 million and federal prison time for corporate espionage. They could not steal it. They could not build an alternative. They had a gun to their heads, and Apex Dynamic held the only key to the handcuffs. By Wednesday afternoon, Julian was a hollow shell of the arrogant executive who had demoted me. The stress of impending corporate death had physically aged him. His usually immaculate tailored suit was deeply wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. His silk tie was pulled loose, his hair was a chaotic mess of sweaty strands, and he had developed a severe twitch in his left eye. The dark comedy of the situation reached its absolute peak when he decided to pace the ground floor lobby to clear his head. He wandered aimlessly past the revolving doors, looking like a man who had just discovered his parachute was packed with silverware. He stopped right in front of my rickety plywood desk, rubbing his temples, groaning in absolute despair. I looked up from a stack of colorful office supply catalogs. "Is everything all right, Julian? Can I get you a complimentary mint or perhaps some hand sanitizer?" I asked, my voice laced with the exact synthetic sweetness he had used on me weeks ago. He glared at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes, completely unaware that the shadowy chief executive officer holding the absolute power of life and death over his career was currently sorting junk mail 2 feet away from his kneecaps. "Just sort the mail, Quinn," he snapped dismissively, waving his hand before shuffling toward the elevators like a condemned ghost. I waited until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then, I slid my hand under the desk, tapped my hidden keyboard, and logged into the secure vendor portal for Apex Dynamic Systems. Sitting right there in the inbox, marked with maximum urgency, was a formal licensing inquiry from the desk of Julian Vance, Chief Operating Officer of Aegis. The email was a pathetic, groveling plea for an emergency enterprise onboarding session. He was begging Apex to sell him the technology to save his contract. I cracked my knuckles and began typing the official pricing proposal. I did not give him the standard market rate. I took the normal cost of deploying a mesh sensor network and multiplied it by exactly 10 times. I had spent the last 3 years studying the Aegis financial ledgers, so I knew precisely how much liquid capital they had allocated for the executive year-end bonus pool. I set the licensing fee to drain that pool down to the absolute last penny. If Julian wanted to license the technology to save the company, he would have to sacrifice his entire executive bonus, and the bonuses of every single board member who had supported him. I hit send, securely routed the proposal through my encrypted servers in Wyoming, and went back to organizing the office supply catalogs. The time bomb was armed, delivered, and ticking down to 0. The extortionate pricing model provoked exactly the reaction I had calculated. The Aegis Board of Directors outright refused to authorize a wire transfer that would completely obliterate their executive bonus structure without looking the extortionist in the eye. They demanded an emergency, in-person negotiation with the elusive founder of Apex Dynamic Systems. Through my encrypted portal, I agreed to their terms. I stipulated that the meeting must take place at exactly 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and it must occur in the grand old glass-walled executive conference room located on the ground floor, directly behind my front desk. At 1:55 on Friday, I calmly placed a neat, handwritten sign on the lobby counter that read, "Back in 15 minutes." I watched through the transparent walls as Julian Vance and 3 senior board members filed into the conference room. They wore their most aggressive power suits, clutching sleek leather portfolios, fully preparing to intimidate some desperate startup founder into lowering the price. Julian looked particularly arrogant, assuming his usual position at the side of the table, ready to play the seasoned corporate shark. At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood up from my squeaky plywood chair. I smoothed down my polyester uniform pants and walked toward the glass enclosure. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the chilled, artificially lit room. Julian immediately scowled, waving his hand at me as if swatting away a pest. "Quinn, what on earth are you doing?" Julian snapped, his voice sharp with irritation. "I specifically told the staff we have a critical vendor negotiation in here right now. Get back to the front desk and hold all our calls." I did not say a single word. I walked slowly and deliberately to the empty leather chair at the head of the long glass table. I stopped, reached up to my collar, and unpinned the cheap, crooked plastic name tag that Human Resources had given me weeks ago. I held it out and dropped it directly onto the center of the glass table. The sharp plastic clack echoed loudly through the completely silent room. "I am the vendor, Julian," I said, my voice dropping the synthetic receptionist warmth and settling into a cold, absolute authority. "I am the sole founder, lead engineer, and chief executive officer of Apex Dynamic Systems, and we have a lot to discuss." The collective shock in the room was palpable. You could have heard a pin drop. Julian's face transitioned from annoyance to utter confusion, and finally, as the horrific reality of the situation washed over him, to a sickly, chalky white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I opened my plain manila folder and slid 4 thick, legally binding contracts across the table to the board members. "The licensing fee to save your Vanguard Therapeutics contract remains exactly as I stated in my initial proposal," I explained, maintaining intense eye contact with the chairman of the board. "It is non-negotiable. However, I have added one final mandatory addendum to the agreement." Julian leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled the document toward him. "Section 4, Paragraph 2. I instructed clearly. "In order for Apex Dynamic Systems to legally interface our proprietary technology with the Aegis mainframe, I require absolute assurance of competent internal management. Therefore, as a condition of this sale, Julian Vance is to be immediately stripped of his title as Chief Operating Officer. Furthermore, due to gross negligence and the intentional falsification of environmental data logs regarding the synthetic insulin shipment last Thursday, he forfeits all company equity, stock options, and severance packages." Julian slammed his fist onto the table, his composure completely shattering. "This is absolute insanity. You cannot do this. You are a receptionist. I will sue you into the ground for corporate espionage. I will have you arrested." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool glass. "I built the system on my personal time, using my personal equipment, and I own the patent. Julian, the only person going to prison is the executive who actively forged temperature compliance reports for a federally regulated pharmaceutical shipment. I have the digital footprints of you ordering the patch to cover up the system failure. I own the data now." The chairman of the board, a ruthless man who cared only about the bottom line, did not even look at Julian. He was doing the math in his head. Vanguard represented 68% of their total quarterly revenue. Julian was just an expendable employee who had become a massive legal liability. The chairman slowly pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and slid it across the table toward Julian. "Sign the resignation addendum, Julian," the chairman said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Sign it right now, or we will personally hand your forged server logs over to the federal prosecutors before the end of the day." It was a flawless, unavoidable checkmate. Julian stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. The arrogance, the fake business degrees, the stolen credit. It all evaporated in an instant. He was completely trapped, destroyed by the exact same woman he had smugly banished to the lobby. With a trembling hand and a face devoid of all color, Julian signed his entire career away. 10 minutes later, I walked out through the automatic revolving glass doors of Aegis MedRoute Solutions for the very last time. The freezing Boston air hit my face, but I had never felt warmer. I walked out as a newly minted millionaire, holding the exclusive rights to the most valuable core technology in the industry. As I hailed a cab, I glanced back through the glass lobby. Julian Vance was standing next to my old, rickety wooden desk, slowly packing his framed Master of Business Administration degree and expensive cologne into a brown cardboard box. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story satisfying and enjoyable, please keep in mind that our channel will absolutely not be uploading new videos here in the near future, and we are transitioning our operations entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep going by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to the absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can scan the QR code currently on your screen, or use the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.